Welcome to episode 12 of Beyond the Frets. I am so excited for today's episode with the amazing Adam Levy. Adam is a prolific sideman, educator, guitarist, composer, and overall fantastic human being, as you can see in this conversation. I had such a blast talking to him. I dove into his inspirations as an educator. He got to take some lessons with Ted Green that inspired him, and it was cool hearing his thoughts on Ted Green's vibe as a teacher. We also talked a lot about Adam's cross-country ventures. He's gone back and forth between LA and New York and also San Francisco, and how those different scenes called to him at different times in his life, and how he's juggled being an educator and a performer, and when to kind of turn on and off those different faucets. If you don't know Adam already, I guarantee you know his playing. He played with Tracy Chapman in the mid-90s, going on to help produce, write, and play on Norah Jones' first couple records. In recent years, he's been putting out records as a band leader and has been featured with Wolfpack, among many other fantastic groups. He's a true gentleman, really soft-spoken, and just is a well-crafted speaker as well. I just really enjoyed this conversation and felt a kindred spirit talking to Adam. But I want to thank all of you for listening to this podcast and sharing it, liking it, giving it a review if you want. It really means a lot. It's been a year that the podcast has now been out. This is the 12th episode, and I'm looking forward to lots more coming in 2022. I'll be finishing my master's in a couple months, so I'll be able to have some more time to dedicate to this project. And I've got more interviews upcoming for you. Do not worry. Things are happening. So without further ado, sit back, grab an axe, and get abducted. This is Beyond the Frets.
Here come the heart collector, looking for specimens of every kind. He's never seen one like yours before. Better look over your shoulder, better lock your door.
Hello.
Hey.
There it is. The sight I've seen many times on my phone. Of course.
Oh man, well, likewise. This is where you do your everything.
Yes, my everything.
Like your big black cow, and yeah.
Right, exactly. Oh man, that stuff is so much fun.
That was amazing. I've never actually worked that little lick that you know, like in the verse. I have worked that out, but not just for, you know, an idea. I've never just played along with the record. That was cool to see.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, the music, like I mentioned in the post, and I didn't realize it until I started learning Steely Dan tunes a couple years ago for other bands and projects. Like, I didn't realize how integral the exact voicings are. Like, you literally can't play, you know, a different top note or it just sounds wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's just such a madness and genius to the writing. It's just like, you know, it's not just, I can't just write down a chord chart, you know. Like, if someone wrote me a chord chart and gave me Black Cow, I would ruin the whole thing. Anyone would ruin it, because you have to know all the, yeah, it's just crazy.
Totally.
It's just a whole nother level. But thank you for doing this. It's very nice to finally meet you. I've been a big, ardent fan for a long, long time, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Sure. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. So, you know, one thing I kind of wanted to dive in, like I mentioned in my email, is guitar education. I think it's obviously something that's near and dear to my heart as a student and teacher for life. We both are.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to know how you got into education yourself, and kind of your influences as a teacher.
Yeah. Well, I always liked teaching. I guess I was just always curious about the way that music worked, like what
what we would now call music theory. But even before I knew that phrase, music theory, I was just curious, like, why does this chord sound the way it does? And why does it sound the way it does when it goes to this other chord? And what's their relationship? And, when I was a kid, my grandfather played piano, and so he was a big influence on me. He was a professional pianist, not a teacher really, but a lot of times I would borrow songbooks from him, like old-fashioned, like piano vocal songbooks, and I'd see all these chord symbols, and they might have guitar diagrams, but most of the time not. So I was just always curious. Well, what does that mean, sus or flat nine, or what does the plus mean? So I was always trying to work that stuff out, and of course this was before there was the internet or anything. So I would just try to ask older friends, smarter friends, anything I could, and as soon as I felt like I knew some of that stuff, I was happy to pass it on. So even when I was in high school, I wasn't teaching a lot of guitar lessons, but occasionally somebody would ask, and I always felt like my strong suit was that part of it, the kind of the building blocks of music, much more so than like, hey, could you show me how to play that song? So that started pretty early for me. And then not too many years later than that, like while I was still in high school, I got to take one lesson with Ted Green.
Oh, wow.
Just on a fluke. Like he had this thing where he really didn't like the admin work of teaching. So he just had like a schedule, like Tuesdays, this guy at this time, this person at that time. And if you couldn't miss your lesson, rather than him having to deal with rescheduling or whatever, you just had to pay for it. If you had a steady Tuesday lesson, but you could send if you couldn't make it, you could send somebody else.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Like, you didn't have to bother Ted with the details. So the first time I showed up, I was just like, hi, I'm here for...
You were a sub.
I'm a sub for Steve Gutai. Nice to meet you.
Wow.
And just that one lesson really was an influence on my teaching style, and later I got to study with him a little bit more. So he was a big influence on my teaching style. How was he?
Right.
Well, he was soft-spoken. Like, he was never... cracking a ruler across my knuckles for, playing the wrong note or anything like that. Also, some lessons we would just listen to records, and before that I wouldn't have thought like that you would call that a guitar lesson. But
yeah,
of course, listening is a great lesson. So sometimes he felt like that was the most important thing. Oh, let's listen to some records. And he was a good listener and communicator. It's something I still am working on all these years later. Like, he really could listen to what you were after and help you find stuff that could really fuel that, rather than like, well, here's my book and we're going to start on page 1 and I'll see you next week and we'll do the next chapter. Like, he never did that. He was very specific to the person in the room, where they're at, where their curiosity is, where their hunger is. So he was a big influence. Also, there was a couple of teachers when I went to music school, which was a place called the Dick Grove School of Music. There was a guy named Adam Levine.
Oh, the pianist?
No.
Okay.
There's Mark Levine. Yeah, there is a pianist, Mark Levine, who wrote that great book. A couple of great books. But no, this is a guy not widely known. I don't think he has any books. But he was the department, the chair of the guitar department when I was at Dick Grove, and he had a very practical teaching style, lots of stuff with chord tones, and he'd be at the chalkboard and show you how to take a really basic kind of, here's the thirds and sevenths, as architecture, but then like, okay, now we're going to add some passing tones. Okay, now we're going to move things around so we get some syncopation. Oh, now we're going to delay the resolution so it doesn't just, So he took this thing that looked kind of like kid stuff and, within a couple of passes at the chalkboard got me, who was a kid, I was 17, playing stuff that was pretty hip,
Yeah.
And I always liked his approach just because it was very like, okay, here's something simple. Now we're going to overlay something a little bit more complicated. Now we're going to do this. And I had another teacher there, this guy, Peter Butterfield, who had a great way of visualizing the fretboard and teaching people how to map it out. And I still use his system with most of my students. If somebody's like, I don't know the notes on the neck and I want to know them, then I still am teaching something I learned in probably 1985 from him. So,
Wow.
these are the people that had a big influence on me as far as my idea of teaching, because they were my teachers, and I found what they did to be effective for me anyway. And then how I really got into teaching, besides just my friends in high school, was when I was 23, so I grew up in LA, and when I was 23, I left LA and I moved up to San Francisco. I didn't really know anybody there, but my girlfriend had moved up north for college, and I thought, well, I'll try San Francisco. So since I didn't know anybody, I started going out to jam sessions because I'm a new guy in town. Nobody knows me. And one of the first jam sessions I went to, I met this guy who was playing, and he heard me play, and afterwards he said, "Hey, do you teach?" And I said, "Yeah, I do, but I don't think you need any guitar lessons." He's like, "No, not for me, but I teach at this school, and one of the main teachers who has like 3 full days of students is leaving. He's leaving California. He's going back east. And if you go talk to the director tomorrow and tell him I sent you, maybe you could." And that started it. So
Wow.
when I moved to San Francisco when I was 23, I kind of just fell into this 3-day-a-week teaching job. And I think ever since then, and that's 30 years ago, I've really built my life around being a teacher and a player.
Were those students back then, like at that first job, were they beginners? Like, was it just kind of all over the place as far as the level of student and the styles?
Yeah, it was. It was kids and adults, and it was all over the place. I mean, I had kids that wanted to learn, just whatever was cool music for kids, in 1990 or 91 or whatever, and then I had adults who had like been in bands and just wanted to get better. Yeah, it's always been a good mix. I think that school attracted. The school is still there. It's called the Blue Bear School of Music, or Blue Bear School of American Music, I think. They always attracted a pretty broad spectrum, and so yeah.
I guess that leads me to another question I had related to guitar education and just your own playing. I mean, you're so versed in so many styles. I mean, you're an amazing acoustic player, blues, jazz, all the stuff that you do well. Was that a byproduct of everything you were listening to growing up? And then also just having to teach those styles at a young age as well?
I would say so. I think it's always been a two-way street. My students would always bring in things that would surprise me. I mean, even I'll come back to what you're asking about, more from the back end of my story, but from the front. Like yesterday, I was teaching a guitar lesson. I have this great student in Los Angeles who I started teaching like a year ago because he was auditioning for his high school jazz band. And he's like a friend of mine, is a family friend. We had some kind of connection. I don't often teach kids anymore. It's just most of the people it's not that I don't like it. It's just that most of the people that approach me about lessons have seen me play at a show or something. So they tend to be adults. And anyway, so I've been helping him like learn how to play all these big band charts for his high school big band, and he, what are these voicings, and how do you play rhythm, and there's a lot of like lines. A lot of times there's like a figure that you've got to play with the horns, and so I was helping him with that. But now I also help him with other stuff he's interested in. And yesterday he showed me this Coldplay. Well, he didn't show me. He asked me. He's like, "Man, there's this Coldplay song I'm trying to figure out. It's called Shiver. I don't know if you know it."
I don't.
And I don't know anything about Coldplay. And I was like, okay, let's figure it out. And so we figured it out. And it's amazing. I mean, that's a band that I don't know anything about. And it really got me thinking about the guitar in a different way and about chord progressions in a different way. And that's an example that's fresh in my mind because it just happened, just yesterday. But that's pretty much been my whole experience. When I was a kid, I did have a pretty diverse. My my folks in the house when I was growing up listened to all kinds of different music, and I never really liked hard rock. Mm-hmm. So that's always been kind of a blind spot for me. The age that I am, I should totally love Van Halen.
Right.
And I now I do, but it's not in my DNA because like I can't play the whole first Van Halen record, from memory or anything like that. Much more like we were talking at the beginning here about Black Cow, like I was listening to those things. I had like in high school, I had Steely Dan's greatest hits. And also my stepdad, who I grew up with, loved the Crusaders. So I heard a lot of Larry Carlton growing up.
Yeah.
Probably more so than your average teenager in the 70s. I heard a lot of Larry Carlton. So that was an influence. My grandfather worked in television as a pianist for a lot of variety shows. And back then, there'd be like a show that had a main host, and they'd always have guests every week. And the guests might be comedians or singers or dancers, whatever. And so his taste in music was kind of whatever was happening that week. And a lot of times I would get records that he had handed down. He would have to get a record for some guest that was coming on and have to kind of learn some of their music for the show. And then he wasn't going to keep listening to it. But I think that's how we wound up with a Bill Withers record in our house that I loved. I listened to it's called Still Bill. I listened to that like crazy.
Okay.
Not a lot of country music, but all kinds of jazz and rock and light rock. And then later on, I got into some fusion. I think the Steely Dan thing kind of led me to be curious about like, well, what else does Larry Carlton do? And then I was like, oh, wow.
That's awesome. And I guess, okay, so you were 23, you were teaching in San Francisco. How did you bridge the gap into, so you said you've always been an educator and a player. Would you say that is like as far as the balance, like does it ever change? Do you tend to rely more on teaching as far as like what you do most of the time for your living or whatnot, or does it just kind of depend on what's happening?
It really depends on what's happening. I don't have a fixed like pie chart where teaching has to be this. And like when I first San Francisco, when I was 23, I was so grateful for that opportunity because I needed to work, I needed to pay rent, and to kind of just fall into a job of teaching that was enough to support me was amazing. And at the same time, in that particular instance was really special because being part of a school like that, I also got to meet the bass teachers and the singing teachers and the drum teachers. And that became a network of people that I actually went on to do gigs with. So that's maybe different than just teaching out of your house where, again, it could be a great way to make a living, but you're not necessarily part of a community. Right. So that made sense at that time. And then there's been other times. I mean, for a couple of years, I was actually one of the editors at Guitar Player magazine. This was in the late 90s. And that came out of teaching. It wasn't because of my journalism skills, but I had submitted some lessons to them for the magazine. This was, like I say, I don't know, 96, 7, something like that. And then they had an opening. Some of the main guys left, and they needed somebody mostly to work on lessons, not so much interviewing players, but just doing lesson stuff. So that led to doing that, and that was a full-time job, which, again, then I did actually also do some more like stories where, oh, cool, I get to go interview somebody. Right. But even then, I think they looked, my boss, my managing editor looked at me as kind of like the teaching guy at the magazine. So I got to do really cool things like, hey, go take a lesson with Jim Hall and then write it up as a lesson for the magazine. Like, cool, I have a good job, or I got to go take a lesson with Andy Summers, and that was really interesting. Wow. And so through being a teacher, that kind of opened up that door to be in a magazine, but as a teacher. And then many years later, I'm jumping around here, I know.
That's okay.
I had lived in New York for a while, and in like 2012, I moved back to Los Angeles. Okay. And though it was a lot of years later, I was kind of in the same boat at that point that I had been when I first moved to San Francisco. When I moved to LA in 2012, I didn't know a lot of people, really, as far as like the scene. Even though I grew up in LA, a lot had changed. So I fell into doing some teaching, and that started out by like doing some substitute teaching at Musicians Institute, and then there's a school called the LA College of Music, and I did some master classes there, and then some substitute teaching. And then there was an opening. The chair of the guitar department was leaving, and the school asked if I wanted to chair the guitar department. So I did that for a few years.
Wow.
And so when I did that, then during those few years, the teaching was a really big piece of the pie. But I find if I do one or the other for too long, I kind of am I don't know. It just maybe
you start yearning for the other.
Yeah. I like to do both, and I don't think there is a perfect balance that is your whole life. But in different periods, different balances make more sense. And
yes, right.
In COVID times, teaching has been a real godsend. It's really sustained me through this time when gigging was pretty much impossible.
Yep.
And now that gigging is possible, little by little, I don't know if are things opening up where you are?
Yeah, they've been a little more relaxed than New York, certainly. I'm in Ohio, so I've been gigging on and off for a number of months, but now I think on the 2nd, a lot of the restrictions were lifted, so it's gangbusters for better or worse.
Yeah, yeah. So now that that's happening, I'm trying to shift my teaching a little bit. I actually sent a note to all my students yesterday saying that I'm going to take July and August off. I do it to hopefully to stay fresh. Like I find if I'm teaching all the time, sometimes it can get blurry to me. Like I'll be saying something to a student and I'll be like, wait, did we talk about this already? Like I can't remember. And I don't like that feeling. I really want to feel like when I'm talking with a student, like I'm super tuned in and dialed in, like Ted was when I studied with him. And all the great teachers that I've had, I never had the sense that they didn't know what day it was or who they were talking to. I mean, I hopefully I haven't gotten that bad, but in my head, I'm kind of like I don't even want to have a glimmer of that. So I always take July off, and this year I'm going to take July and August off from teaching, mostly because of Zoom. Honestly, like I'm not so much burned out on teaching, but just the amount of screen time is just kind of astounding.
Yeah.
And
sorry to subject you to even more of it.
No, that's okay.
Okay. I always send that to everyone I ask. I'm like, I know you don't want to have another hour on Zoom, but it would be really cool to talk.
No, I'm really glad. But so I do it for me and I do it for them and hopefully when I come back to it in September, I'll have some fresh perspective. And also I like to feel that both sides can kind of inspire each other. When I'm teaching and I've been playing a lot, I really can feel like I can talk, because a lot of my students, honestly, at this point, half of their questions just have to do with they're trying to get into the business of playing.
Yeah.
And so when they're asking me like, well, I had a student yesterday who Zoomed in from the recording studio. He's like, hey man, I'm in Florida at a studio making my record. I have some questions. And
wow,
like, I'm much better equipped to answer that kind of stuff if I've been in a recording studio in the last 5 years. And if I've just been teaching and teaching and teaching, maybe I'm, and vice versa. I feel like the teaching really inspires me. Like it sounds funny to me. It sounds funny. Maybe it sounds funny to somebody else. But like this Coldplay song really inspired me. Like I want to write a song. I want to I want to try a different approach. Like, and all the stuff that we get into, as with teaching and stuff. Like there's some modal interchange in this song, and there's like all this. It's like anyway.
I love that.
It's just funny to me. Like I have this idea of Coldplay as a pop band, and I'm just like, boy, I'm an idiot. Like there's just a lot going on there.
There's always something to glean from your students that you would never think, especially with little kids. I don't teach a whole lot of little kids anymore, but when I did, just like their insights into the world or how they would phrase something with the instrument or music. You're like, oh wow, like I would have never thought about that. So you have to have both. And I do love the fact that as professional musicians, we can kind of move the pie chart around. Maybe some years I'm recording and touring a lot, maybe other years I'm teaching a lot. That's why I love doing music personally, because I can, put on another hat for a few months or a year, put on another hat.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would like to figure out the proportion where I'm the most comfortable at like living, money-wise. But I do love that we're able to dive into another aspect of this industry. It's not like I'm going to know what I'm going to do every day for the next 20 years. If I did that, I can't do that. It's not my life.
Right. And there are people who can do that. And if you're like you are and like I am, and you're not that person, then you're going to be a lot happier if you go with your own flow. That's great to figure out early on and not be like swimming against the tide or the correct. I don't know. I don't swim, so I don't know what the correct terminology is, but the ocean is mighty, and if you swim against it, then it's going to be a hard life. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of just life, I mean, I listened to a lot of your interviews, and I've heard you talk so much, and so many of your guitar tips are not just about how do you find new voicings or roll the dice. It's
Yeah.
also just how do you approach music with like a humanity and a humility. And I'm kind of wondering where in life you sort of found that side of things. I mean, because just in my experience, a lot of people that I've met and me, I spent, my teens and early 20s thinking that music was the be all end all of life and that I had to be something. And if I wasn't a great guitarist, and I was not a great person.
Hmm.
And I think in the past couple of years, me figuring out that my musical self is actually separate from myself. I'm just kind of curious how you came to that, because I very much get that from when I hear you speak and talk about music and life. I very much just get a sense that you are, a deep human and you respect life and everything that comes with it.
Oh, well, wow. That's a good question. I have to really think about this. I think some of it came from my teachers as models, like Ted, who was just really like a real wizard of music on the guitar, Ted Green, and was so humble about it and was so curious about other things, curious just about people, and I don't know. I've definitely experienced other teachers, not so much people that I've studied with, but just people I've encountered who are just like, this is the music, this is how it goes, and like,
Yep.
Ted had just none of that. I'm sure he knew he was really special, but
Yeah.
I think a certain amount of humility maybe rubbed off there. Also, just going through life, people that really were like hot dogs rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know. I've always, like, when I've listened to bands, if I had a visual sense of who they, or not just a visual sense, but a sense of who they are and what they were doing, I was always the most curious about not the person who's like, doing backflips and the stuff, but just like, yeah, but who's that guy back there just like playing all this tasty guitar stuff? Who's that guy?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
so those kind of people have always been interesting to me. When I was a kid, but not a kid, but like when I was old enough to start going to see shows, like there was a club in LA called the it was called the Country Club. It was not a country club, but it was called Wolf and Riss Miller's Country Club. And I used to go see bands there. Like I saw Eric Johnson play there. I saw Alan Holdsworth play there with the IOU band.
Wow.
And I saw Steve Morse band there a couple times. I really liked Steve Morse when I was in that phase. I could never play anything like him, but I think he's great. And I
Yeah.
don't hear people talk about him as much as they ought to. He's so amazing. And I got to meet some of them. I didn't get to meet Alan Holdsworth, but I did get to meet Steve Morse. And anyway, those guys just all just seemed, again, like how Ted was such a wizard but was so humble. All the aforementioned guys just seemed real down to earth. So I never thought it was cool to I mean, but maybe that's also not what you're asking. So I'll
No. It was fairly open. I wasn't looking for. When I was 17, I
Yeah.
became humble.
yeah, but also just life, man. Like life is hard, and
Yeah.
I mean, this is in 2009. I was widowed. I was
gosh.
married and widowed, and
Sorry.
thanks. And it was such a huge lesson, because like I totally relate to what you're saying about, like, if I play guitar, then I have my place in the world, and like if I'm playing good, I'm in a good place in the world. I'm paraphrasing, but you said something kind of along those lines. And that was the first time in my life that I had experienced that kind of loss or grief. And there just was no guitar chord that was going to make me happy. There was no thing that I could do on the guitar that was going to just instantly go, oh, cool, everything is great now. And that, although, this came later in my life, that's happened when I was in my early 40s, I do think that was a shift for me of like, okay, life is just so much bigger and deeper than anything. Music is a beautiful thing. It gives so many people so much joy and freedom and everything. But if you look at the world, if you zoom out, if you look up from your guitar or your pedal board tuner, like stop looking down at your tuner. If you look up, there's just a lot going on. And obviously not just grief, of course, but also all kinds of beautiful things. And it was there was a period there where I just had to find my way again. And I think those few years after that shaped a lot my idea of a more, life is life is the whole thing. It's not just guitar life, but it's the whole thing.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. It's a really deep and powerful story.
A midnight stroll that started sweetly, Corolla and her friends made for. The moon was full, the stars were many, above the caves at Lake Lenore. So sure of the way she wandered off alone. Carrie never liked to follow trails or maps. Look into the constellations leading lights. That all the stars went out and she was good as gone. Here comes the heart collector, looking for specimens of every kind. He's never seen one like yours before. You better look over your shoulder, better lock your door. Here comes the heart collector, looking for specimens of every kind. He's never seen one like yours before. You better look over your shoulder, better lock your door.
I wanted to circle back because I know that you've kind of jumped coasts a few times, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about that. Because I think everyone in music world, or just, in America, thinks of LA versus New York as these like diametrically opposite, things, like polar opposites. I was actually born in Burbank and grew up in Portland, so I get the West Coast vibe, but now I'm in Ohio, so that's like a whole nother thing. So I'm kind of curious how you ended up jumping back and forth and what you take from both of those scenes.
Yeah. Well, let's see. There's really like a third city between LA and New York. I lived in San Francisco for a while at a time when a lot of cool stuff was happening. And I left LA when I was 23. I was working as a guitarist at that point, but not a lot. So I can't really talk about that LA, although I wish I could. It was a really interesting time.
Gotcha.
But it was also like rock bands on the Sunset Strip and
Right.
And if you were born in Burbank, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so I'll try to keep it in the context of the last 20 years, but I've really moved a lot. Like when I was 23 in 1989, I moved from LA to San Francisco, and then I stayed there till 95 or 96. Then I left San Francisco, moved to New York for a year, moved back to San Francisco for a year, moved back to New York for a year. I'm and like the thing that's has driven it much of the time is just wanting to be close to a particular scene. So this is maybe the part that people can get something from, which is that when I moved to New York in 1996, I was listening to a lot of music that had come out of New York, a lot of kind of downtown improv records, and when I would read interviews with artists that I like, it seemed like they were all based in New York. The records that I was listening to were in New York. The
So
clubs.
who would that been?
Well, I was really into Bill Frisell.
Okay.
And the John Zorn scene, this drummer Joey Barron, who I wound up actually playing with in his band
Right.
for a year, Paul Motion, Joe Lovano,
Gotcha.
John Schofield. And even by then, by 96, a lot of those guys had either moved out to the burbs or left New York entirely. So it wasn't super realistic that that I thought I would like land in the middle of that scene.
Yeah.
John Schofield wasn't just like hanging out on the corner on Ludlow Street.
Right.
But I would bump into a lot of great musicians, and a lot of stuff happened by being in New York, stuff that would have never happened otherwise. Like I said, I got to play in Joey Barron's band for a year, and he
Right.
was a total hero of mine, and that would have never happened if I stayed in California.
Wow.
I got to play so many good things, and then later on, playing with Nora Jones came out of that. Really,
Right.
just through personal connections, being on the scene. And that's really all the stuff that drew me to New York was, players, records, clubs. I just didn't think I was going to be able to crack into that jawbreaker of music without being in proximity. The calculus might be different now because of the internet, and a lot of people live in the burbs and make
Sure.
a huge impact. But I like to be in the city. And then when I moved back to LA in 2012, part of it was in the wake of losing my wife, but also my musical tastes were shifting, and I was really into records that were happening in LA and the scene in LA. There was a club called Largo where John Bryan would play and Joe Henry would play, and the Watkins family, and Blake Mills is in LA, and producers that I liked were in LA. So I was curious because even though I grew up in LA, the LA that I left in 1989 was completely different to the LA in 2012, right? But I loved so much stuff that was happening. Oh, Gabby Moreno was an artist who I had met, who I'd wanted to try to do more work with. So much stuff going on, and that worked out to be great. But your question was like, what do I take away from the different scenes? It's hard. Now it feels more fluid to me. There was a time, especially in the 90s, where I felt like LA is a recording town, New York is a live music town, and of course, there's lots of examples of how it's not that black and white. But I think that's the kind of idea. Like, people in New York improvise, they play hard, they there's creative stuff going on all the time. LA is kind of a company town, you know. A good gig would be if you could get in the house band on American Idol, or something like that. So, but in the time that I lived there, from 2012 until just last year, the live scene in LA really blew up. A lot of young players were just making it happen, and the kind of old rules of LA is like this and New York is like that was just all kind of falling apart. So I guess the takeaway would be, try to plant your seed where you think the soil is going to be the most fertile for you, but also be open, because things might surprise you. Like the club that you think of as the epicenter of a scene might not really be. There might be a whole other scene going on that you just don't know about yet, because it's for example, Blake Mills started curating these shows at a surf shop that the name of which escapes me. I'm so embarrassed. I can't think of it right now. But that's not a place that you would think all the cool music is happening. But he would just put together a bunch of guitar players and do these kind of loose, improvised shows. And then he started doing them at this place called the No Name Bar, which was just a bar without a sign. But, he would be playing with Jim Keltner and Pino Palladino in this little club, and you would not know about it because he wasn't posting flyers about it on Instagram or anything. It would just be
wow.
You kind of just had to know.
Yeah.
So that's a heavy scene that's going on that I'm sure you wouldn't hear about in Ohio. I was living in LA and I was like, wait, you'd hear about one that happened 2 weeks ago and you're like, what?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Try to give yourself the best advantage by being around the people that turn you on, but also just be open that there's going to be other waves. Music isn't just this one directional thing. There's all these different things going on, and it's really important to be open and if the main goal, you have to think about, what is your main goal? Is my main goal I need to make a living? Is my main goal I want to be famous? Is my main goal I just want to do creative stuff and be turned on? What is it? And I've said this before. I know you probably roll your eyes because you said you've listened to some other interviews, and I this is something I say a lot, but I'm going to say it again. You could be the person that creates a scene. If you're waiting for a scene, and this is true in LA or in, your town, whatever your town is. When I moved to LA, one of the really cool scenes was there was a guy named Scroat. He's a guitar player named Scroat. And he was curating these kind of salon nights at this restaurant bar called Genghis Cohen. Have you ever heard of Genghis Cohen?
No.
Yeah, a lot of people haven't. It's a little tiny music room in the back of a really cool Chinese restaurant.
Wow.
But this guy Scroat, that place has had music for a long time, but it's mostly been singer-songwriters.
Okay.
But Scroat would just bring together a whole bunch of unlikely people and get them. Hey, Tim, why don't you do something with Ben? Hey, and that was a really cool scene that you would never know about. It's not listed in the papers. Not that anybody reads the papers, but it wasn't promoted on socials or anything. It just was this thing that you kind of had to know. And so in order to be a part of that, you'd have to get out of your house and talk to people. But also, Scroat just made this happen. He went to this club and said, hey, I have this idea. And he convinced them, And for a year or something, this was one of the coolest things going on. And you could be that person. I guess that my little bit of advice is like, don't wait for somebody else to create something like that. You could create it. Even clubs that are now legendary probably started because one or two people had a cool idea, like, yeah, I want to do this thing. I think it'll be cool. So that's, I don't know where.
No, that's great advice. I love that, because I was just thinking about asking, what's your advice for people like my age, or like those students that you said often are trying to break into the scene, and that's just it. I mean, I think nowadays, we don't have the luxury of even possibly, being in Art Blakey's band or whatever, like those like mentorship positions that it kind of like was your track to like the business, like for better or worse, kind of doesn't exist as much. But now we do have, endless possibilities to just say, hey, I want to do a chamber orchestra in a dive bar. Let's do it.
Right.
Whatever it is, you just have to figure it out. Obviously, that puts the onus on you, which is difficult, and in many ways, logistically and financially and etc. In addition to just trying to be artistic and play your instrument well, but
Yeah.
all that other stuff.
Yeah. And that's not for everybody. I mean, that's why I was saying, like, you have to decide, like, what are you in it for? But one thing you could be in it for is not for yourself at all. Like I mentioned things like, like about yourself. I got to make a living. I want to be famous. I want to do this. But you could also just be somebody who creates a cool scene that's for other people. And that can be really powerful too. So just, it does put the onus on you for all the reasons that you said. But I would just encourage people to, it doesn't mean like, hey, leverage everything, sell everything and risk everything, but just push yourself a little bit and see what happens if you just try to do something that seems a little bit uncomfortable. Everything cool that anybody's ever done started that way. If everybody just decided, I'm going to do the safest thing right now and take care of myself, there would be no music that we love. Your parents probably wouldn't have made you. You wouldn't exist. Nothing really would be happening of any significance. So try to, if that helps kind of be a lever that gets you to do stuff. And this, coming back to teaching too, could also be a thing. Like my friend Joel Harrison, I don't know, have you met Joel?
Yep.
Right. So he started this alternative guitar summit, which was partly because there was already this like New York guitar summit, and they weren't giving Joel a lot of love. And Joel was like, F it, I'll start my own. And he did. And now it's this beautiful thing. And, Julian Lage is part of it. And, some of the greatest players and teachers alive. But, it started from Joel going, I'm going to do this thing. And so he had to find a place that he could have a summer camp and, and a place to do shows. He didn't know anything about that, but he figured it out and he created this thing. My friend Sammy Miller, great drummer. He's starting this thing called Playbook, which is a really cool. It's kind of like for kids or for young people who want to play in a big band. It's like a play along, but with big band charts. So you could just play along with. You could be the second alto player, or you could be the third trombone, or whatever, or you could be the guitar player, and you could mute things and mix things. It's a really cool idea. I mean, we've always had play along records, but I don't think we've ever had like a play along big band thing with these cool charts. And it's a teaching platform for him. He started it. Or Guitar Mastery Intensive, which was started by Isla Cantor, who's a teacher and a great guitar player. So it's not just that you could start a scene in a club, but even as a teacher, you can think bigger than, how do I get more students to come to me? Like, build something.
Yeah.
If you can. It's not for everybody. Not everybody's going to do that. I haven't done it. But you could do it, and you could be that person and really spark a change. Yeah.
Well, I mean, guitar tips. That's no slouch there. So
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
it's definitely its own scene, and I think a very highly respected and really cool one.
Zach, thank you. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
gosh. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. How did that come about? The guitar tips thing.
Again, it was kind of a new in town, what do I do thing. I had moved back to LA in 2012 or 13, something like that. And I wanted to connect with people, and I always liked teaching. And YouTube was a thing, and I thought, okay, I'll just I wanted to have a practice, like something I could do every week, regardless of what else was happening.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share the things. It seemed like what people, at that time, I mean, it's a completely different place now, but at that time, what I saw on YouTube from guitar teachers was mostly, here's how to play All Along the Watchtower, or here's how to play this or that, and I'm going to show you the right way, and that's great, that's valuable too. But I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to talk more about just some of the more life stuff. Like, of course, we can talk about drop two voicings, and we can talk about the mechanics of music. But to me, having a life in music has always meant having some kind of balance in your life. So half the tips were like just real simple things about life, and half of them were nitty gritty, like let's demystify the melodic minor mode or whatever modes or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, and in the beginning, I didn't have a lot of feedback from people. I was just like putting them out into the world. I wasn't like a viral YouTuber or anything like that. So, but over time, I would start to get more feedback, or I would just run into people and they'd be like, "Oh, I saw your thing. I'm really curious about this thing." And so that got me kind of thinking just about more questions and what kinds of stuff people were curious about. As a teacher, I wind up seeing a lot of the same kinds of students. So in my little bubble, I think everybody wants to know the melodic minor modes or whatever. But you just meet people and they'd ask questions about stuff they were curious about, and you're like, huh, never thought of that.
Yeah.
So, again, I tried to teach some real practical things, like one of the early tips was, if you perform as who's that?
Pumpkin,
Hi, Pumpkin.
my boy. He's a cutie.
Yeah, he is. Aw.
He's obsessed with me. He'll like perch on my arm and go to sleep like a bird.
Aw,
He's something.
that's the greatest.
He was sleeping on my piano. I put a blanket on it because he's always clacking away. I'm like, well, I'll just put a blanket on it, and that's your bed.
That's so funny. I just had things like, if you tend to play gigs standing up, well, then you should spend some of your practice time standing up, because
Yes.
it's a shock to your system if you spend all day on your ass and then you go to a gig and stand up.
Yep. That's such a great idea.
So stuff like that. And then also stuff like go outside, take a walk,
Yeah.
learn to take a punch, not literally, but just like the music business and life is going to throw you some punches. And if you want to be in it for a long time, you have to learn how to deal with that. I don't remember what inspired that particular tip, but
Something.
somebody must have punched me.
Right.
And that's how it started. Anyway, so I started it on YouTube. I did it for a few years. And then at one point, my friend Mason Stoops, smart guy that he is, was like, man, you should do it on Patreon, and because when I started it, it was not, I wasn't thinking of it as an income source at all. It was just like, hey, I'm this guy. I'm a middle-aged guy who's played some guitar for a while. Maybe let me share some things. Maybe let's start a community.
Yeah.
Let's talk to each other about this stuff. And then Mason was like, oh, well, you could still do that, but you could also, make a little bit of money doing it. I was like, that sounds great. So I tried. He really convinced me, and I tried it out. And that's how the Patreon channel started. Was I had already been doing guitar tips for a couple of years, and I wanted to try to shift it into a way I could make a little money and develop a community in a more direct way. YouTube is beautiful, but it's so wide open, and it's nice on Patreon to just like, okay, these are my people. This is my tribe. I don't have to talk to everybody. I can talk to these people, and I have a sense of who they are and what they're curious about.
I really liked. I was listening to an interview on Chasing Frets podcast with the Premier guys.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things you talked about was like the importance of having like a newsletter, and also how the Patreon is just so direct. You interface with people, more one-on-one rather than, okay, 10,000 people are going to watch my video and they're lurking or whatever.
Yeah.
And I love that, because I think someone my age, where I've grown up entirely with, my Mac, I used to think more that I had to, if I wasn't getting thousands of views, then I wasn't reaching people. But now I'm like the opposite. Like, I deleted all my social media accounts last year. I'm obviously back on, as you know, but I realized that I needed to take more stock in just, having 5 people that I'm talking to and sharing ideas with, or calling people or whatever, as opposed to just writing, sounds killing, man, fire emoji, fire emoji. So I love that you really interface with people, and even just us meeting. I mean, you have really no reason to talk to, nobody, Zach from Ohio that plays guitar. So just doing that, I think that means a lot to me. And, me doing the podcast, I've been grateful, and, everyone that I've interviewed is just like you, where they're like willing to, like message people and talk and just hang. And I think it's such an important thing, especially, our community is such a small one, the jazz adjacent, improvised guitar world. It's I love it.
Yeah, jazz adjacent. That's exactly right. Wow. Well, I'm curious, like, who are you? This is a leap, but I'm just asking because I'm curious. Who are you listening to these days? Who turns you on in music?
Right now, I've been really listening to a lot of blues.
Okay.
And I was never a blues guy growing up. I was
Oh.
more of the Van Halen, Metallica. Like, I was a metalhead, hair down here. Like, let's go. And then I jumped to jazz, so I kind of missed the blues thing. And I'm always kicking myself in the butt because I'm like awful at playing the blues, and I just really want to be able to do that and incorporate it well, because I respect it so much.
Yeah.
So I've been on just a huge, like, Albert King, Freddie King, SRV. I mean, all those cats, just all the real stuff. BB King.
Uh-huh.
Those guys are just like knocking my socks off.
Huh. Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool.
And thankfully the people that I played with in Columbus, I was in Columbus the past 10 years. I've got to play with a lot of older cats that, made me learn great music. So I love Mike Campbell. I love Tom Petty. I love, like 10cc, Steely Dan, all the 70s stuff. Jim Croce, Glenn Campbell.
Yeah.
I mean, all of that stuff. I'm just like, that stuff just blows me away. Harry Nilsson, Randy Newman. Yeah, I've just been getting into the art of the song and finding just all these great songs that I'm just adapting for trio, because I think nothing is off limits. As much as I love standards, I whipped up arrangement of Louisiana 1927 for my trio, and just all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to figure out, in my lens, which is jazz-ish. I don't know, whatever it is. But so yeah, I think that whole thing has really been a bug in my ear lately.
And when you play tunes like that, because this is something I have students ask me about. Some of my more kind of higher level students who are trying to break in or maybe are out there gigging, they want to lead a trio,
Yeah.
and they're always asking me like, how do I find songs, and especially if you're adapting like that kind of stuff, like Randy Newman and looking beyond stuff in the real book, but just like the real, great American music. Do you approach it like in a jazz way? Like, well, we'll play the melody once and then everybody solos, then we'll play the melody again? Or do you have more like arrangements with different elements? Or how do you bring those tunes into a trio live performance thing?
Yeah, gosh. Well, it depends. I mean, some tunes, lend themselves well to just head solos head, but I don't hate that, but I'm kind of over it already.
Yeah.
So I try to just like blow things up. Like I do a Tom Petty tune. Oh gosh, I can't even remember the name. It's on Wildflowers. It's like this great like droney country tune. It's just acoustic guitar and like mic, and so that's just kind of like a wide open. Like we'll play the melody a little bit, but then as far as the blowing, it's totally free. Maybe it's with the D drone, maybe it's not. I mean, I have players that I trust enough that we can go to these different places and I could be explicit about it. So I'm not worried at all about, oh, it's got to be straight up and down unless or they can't, make it happen. I try to just explode things. Sometimes that's harmonically, exploding things, taking out chords instead of like over reharming, which I've certainly had my fair share of, which is great, of course. But I tend to do that too much, so I try to maybe just go the opposite way. Like, what if this was just like a free statement, and we're just all playing together, and who knows what happens? Or the other thing is just playing the song, like not even blowing. I think I might even do that with Louisiana, 1927. It's like, why do I need to mess with it?
Right.
What melody that I'm gonna improvise is better than that? So I'm just gonna play it.
Right.
So I don't know. Those are the things I think about. I do. There's usually something about a song, obviously, that catches my ear, and there's like some sort of bug that I'm like, oh, I can play with this. Like there's some melodic riff or some rhythmic motive that I can, just kind of dive into, and that can be my little quirk that I make an arrangement out of.
And do you have students, like we were talking a little earlier about like mentoring, and like obviously we're not going to join the Jazz Messengers or anything like that, but like do you have students who are at a level where like they come out and like you can see the gears turning, like, man, I want to have a trio, or maybe they do have a trio, and like I don't know, do you have students who are out there doing it on the scene and like?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of students that are like, they'll check in every few months or like twice a year, and I'll just kind of like dump them with a whole bunch of stuff, or they'll just ask me, about getting into the business or whatever. There's this great guitarist named Josh who just graduated from Eastman, and the other day he just wanted to Zoom because he just wanted my advice on whether he should go to grad school or he should like get into the scene, that type of thing. So I field a lot of those questions, and I appreciate it because I'm 27, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But so if anyone looks up to me, that's cool, but I'll just give you my experience, and that's about all I can do. But yeah, I love having students that are at that level where they're trying to figure things out, just seeing the possibilities in their own artistic ventures and as a professional.
I'm curious about the Columbus scene, because
Yes.
and especially since you mentioned blues, like there was a guy that I used to play with. He died a couple years ago, who grew up in Marion.
Oh wow.
His name was Bill Sims Jr., and he was a guy in New York for 20-30 years. I don't know how long he was in New York, but he was one of the great real deal blues guys. If he were alive now, he'd be probably 72. Played piano and guitar and knew tons of songs and had a real open idea of the blues. It wasn't like fixed in just, this blues, but like the whole thing. And it was so great. But he grew up in Marion and then played professionally in Columbus, probably in the 60s, I guess, or 70s maybe.
Okay.
And I guess at that time, a lot of like big name artists would come through town on tour, and he would be like in the house band playing organ or something.
Wow.
And I was just curious, like, is there still is there a blues scene in Columbus?
My scope is a little limited, but I would say not as much. There's some cats for sure, but
Okay.
it's not. I don't know. It's not like maybe the real deal stuff. Maybe it's more like
Okay.
the weekend warrior, like
Oh, yeah.
playing at a suburb bar
Right.
type thing.
Right.
But I will say the people that did grow up in the 70s and 80s playing in Columbus. I mean, just the organ scene alone, like funky, or oh my God, Columbus has like an insane organ history. So a lot of the guitar players that I look up to in Columbus grew up in that, funk, groove, soul, organ music. There was a ton of that.
Oh,
Like
wow.
tonight, I'm playing with Tony Monaco in Columbus, who's one of the great, jazz organists, and he happens to live in Columbus, and he was from that ilk. He's got the whole lineage. So
Wow.
that kind of adjacent stuff
Mhm.
is hugely influenced, absolutely. But as far as the real blues, whatever that means, I don't know enough. I wish I did, honestly. Oh, there's my other
Oh.
cat barging in.
Whoa! How many cats do you have?
I have two.
Oh.
Yeah. But yeah, Columbus is an amazing town. It's got some of the deepest musicians ever. I think a lot of people just don't know. They think it's like a flyover city, which I thought, when I was moving there, I was like, I don't want to go to Columbus. I want to go to Berkeley. I want to be in Boston. But I'm so glad I ended up there, because I just kicked my butt, and all these old, mentors are just so willing to have it both ways and just extending me the offer to play with them and,
Yeah.
kick my butt a little bit, but in a, supportive way. I love it.
That's the greatest.
Yeah. Well, Adam, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I really, really appreciate you doing this. Oh, I did have one more question.
Sure.
Just because I've been listening to your interviews and you're so on the nose about what's happening, but especially with guitar text. Textbooks or
Yeah.
method books or whatever.
Yeah.
And like I can tell you're always like finding new ones or like gleaning information. So
Totally.
I'm just kind of curious. I know you're into Miles Okazaki's book, of course.
Yeah.
I know you've got the Improviser's OS.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, the Advancing Guitarist is the Bible. But I'm
Totally.
curious if there's anything else. Oops,
Ah.
there it goes. If there's anything else along the way that you've kind of really, really taken a lot from, or that you found to be interesting.
Yeah.
I know that there's so many, but
Yeah. I'm looking at my shelf
yeah.
here. Well, okay, I'll mention a couple. Like this one I've mentioned before, I'll mention it again. This is a great book for $10. Like, I can't overstate it. It's for right-hand technique. It's just basically 2 chords in the left hand and then 120 different right hand patterns of how to just arpeggiate basically the same 2 chords, C and G7. You might have heard of them. They're kind of up and coming chords. But of course you could do anything in your left hand. You could make any
Sure.
2 chords. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that. But it's just a really, I don't know. This is a book that I keep coming back to. Every few years I go, maybe I'll crack open the Giuliani one more time.
Yeah.
And I always find one that I was like, oh, I don't think I ever played that one. Because I've never gone cover to cover with it.
Sure.
Let's see. This is a book that I had years ago and I recently got back into. I'll give you a few. This is a book by Dale Bruning.
Okay.
He's a guy that Bill Frisell studied with for a little while.
Oh wow.
And it's about legato phrasing, not in an Alan Holdsworth way, more like in a Jim Hall way, but how, like, if you don't want, like, if you want to play fast in jazz, there's like the Benson thing, which is the greatest. But like, there's also guys like Jim Hall who could actually, could play fast, but there's a kind of a swing to it, and the idea of this book is it's about phrasing and articulation and like when to use hammers and slides, and just kind of a different approach to the fretboard. And anybody who's listened to Jim Hall or Bill Frisell will recognize the stuff once they get into it.
Wow, that's odd. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, that's a good book. I can't find it right now. It might be on my music stand. The Gene Bertoncini book, Approaching the Guitar, is
Love
great.
that book.
I didn't have that one as a kid. I wish I did. So I'm a latecomer, but I think that's a great book. I do a lot of the stuff in that book just kind of as like a warm-up,
I'm so good. Yeah, when I went to undergrad, my teacher, who was a student of Mick Goodrick's back in the 70s, early Berkeley days, he had us get 5 books, and one of them, of course, was the Advancing Guitarist, and one of the others was Gene's book. And they're so great. They're such a great pairing as well.
Yep.
So, yeah, I love that.
Totally. Well, I just found it on the
There
shelf.
you go.
There it is. Yeah, that's the one. I'll tell you one other that I got. So I've been studying for the last year with a teacher named Gerald Harsher, who teaches something called body mapping.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, and that came out of Alexander technique. It was this movement kind of like is built on top of Alexander technique and then goes someplace different with it. And so this is a book written by one of the main people in that movement. Her name is Barbara Conable, and it's called What Every Musician Needs to Know About the Body.
Wow.
And it's great. There's a lot of stuff in here, like diagrams and stuff. I mean, the whole idea with body mapping, and I'm not a body mapping teacher, I'm a student of it, but so, I may not have the best language quite to talk about it, but it's basically to really learn how your body is put together and how it works. A lot of people, musicians and otherwise, get this idea of like, this is how the body is put together, and this is the size of things, and this is the use of things. And until you really understand, like, what are the size of your bones, and what are they built to do, and how does your body work? Like, you're going to be kind of working inefficiently, maybe creating tension. Because what they call mismapping. It's like when people just have an unrealistic sense of what they're built like and how to use it. So that's a very clumsy description, but it's a powerful tool. So a lot of this book is diagrams showing you like, here's what your body really is made of, and here's how to actually use it. And there's other books around that too, that I found helpful, but this is the main one. And
Okay.
I'll just read you. There's a bit on the very last page that is just super great. This is literally the last paragraph of the book.
Okay.
And
No
she
spoilers,
mentions
man. No.
she mentions a thing in here called primary control, which anybody who's studied Alexander technique might know about. But it's just about using your spine as. I'm not going to try to explain it, but I'll just read this. But that's a thing in here. Some musicians recover ease and freedom of movement, and with it, their primary control, by allowing the music they are playing to affect them. They consciously build a feedback loop with the music in which they are changed by the music as they make it. Music deeply nourishes us and deeply frees us when we are open to it. Music itself is an agent of liberation.
Wow.
I just think it's really cool, like that the music you're making can like free your body, free your mind, so really it's an opportunity to connect with it, to be in touch with it, and not just play from your head like, oh, these are the right notes, but actually like, what is this stuff? Oh, it's music. It makes me want to move my body. It makes me be open. So anyway, it's a fun book. It's a useful book. I would really recommend that book. There's no hot guitar licks in it, but it's just a useful book.
No harmonic major licks.
Oh no.
I don't know if it's for me then. No, I'm going to order that ASAP because I'm the type that moves a lot when I play, which is cool, but I think it's at a detriment at this point because I've been having, like you responded to my story that one day I've been having hand issues, and a lot of it has actually cleared up from what I've been doing. But my teacher at grad school is like an Alexander Technique guy, and so he's told me all about body mapping, but I need to get into this, so this is fantastic.
Great.
Thank you so much, Adam, for everything. I just appreciate your candor and your honesty and just, your willingness to dive in with me and talk about stuff. And you're just an awesome figure in the guitar and music world. And, I'm really glad that we've been able to connect and meet.
Zach, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this conversation, and thanks for all that you do.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Let's stay in touch.
Okay.
All right. Later.
How great is that guy? Come on, what an awesome chance to sit down with the Adam Levy. I really hope you check out his music, and he has a wonderful Instagram account where he posts all sorts of yummy guitar tips. That's @stringjuggler. And of course, his Patreon, Guitar Tips. I've got the link to his website in the show notes, so just take a click on that and you'll find everything you need to check out Adam and be a patron of this wonderful, wonderful artist. I really appreciate all my listeners making it through every episode and giving great comments and feedback. Please like, share, rate, review, do anything you can to help the podcast out. It really, truly helps. Every 5-star rating and nice little review on Apple really does go a long way. And I think Spotify has introduced a feature where you can rate podcasts as well. So that would be an immense help to us at Beyond the Frets. I really want to thank you again, dear listener, and I'm looking forward to next episode with the amazing Frank Potenza, LA legendary jazz guitarist who taught many years at USC. Until then, make sure you catch up on all the previous episodes of Beyond the Frets. Again, this is the 12th one, so there's 11 others to check out. All right, have a good one. Later.